Can Michael Penix become the efficient underneath passer the Atlanta Falcons need?
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And if you do not know me, I am your very humble host, Aaron Freeman, a.k.a. Mr. Drew, a.k.a. the Jolly Green Giant, a.k.a. Mr. a.k.a. And I've been covering the Atlanta Falcons for almost 2 decades, formerly at falcfans.com, RIP, still going strong as the host of this illustrious podcast, been podcasting for almost 15 years. And I thank each and every one of you that have been here, whether you're new or you were that one person that was listening to the podcast almost 15 years ago. Shout out to you, John. But I thank each and every one of you that is an everydayer of this pod that makes this podcast your first listen each and every day, whether you're old or new. And all you got to do to become an everydayer, old or new, subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to get the latest episode as soon as it is available. So we are going to look ahead to the future, to the 2028 summer, to talk about NFL players now being eligible to participate in flag football in the Olympics in LA. We'll discuss how Drake London could be in store for a breakout year. But before we get there, guys, we got to pump, right? Last week, we talked about Michael Penix's deep ball raising the ceiling for the Falcons offense, but today we're talking all about the floor, and that's really not talking about the vertical passes, but those underneath passes and Penix's ability to be the efficient passer when that deep stuff is taken away, because let's remember, NFL teams and defenses can take away the deep ball. It's how they like to play in today's modern NFL, the defensive revolution that we've seen in the NFL over the last 5 years, with teams moving away from that cover three that the Seahawks popularized in the 2010s, that middle of the field closed coverages, to more split safety, deep safety, middle of the field open coverages, that Fangio style of defense. We talked with Cody Alexander of matchquarters.com the other day on the podcast, talking about how he didn't think that style of defense was going to go away anytime soon. And for those of you that are out of the loop and why that defense has sort of taken the league by storm these last couple of years, is because the whole goal of that defense and the way that they play is by having those 2 deep safeties and playing quarters, cover 6, cover 2, all that stuff, is to try to limit the explosive plays, right? And force teams to kind of dink and dunk and go underneath. And if you watch this past year's Super Bowl, the Eagles were successfully able to do that to the Kansas City Chiefs. It's what every defense has been trying to do to the Kansas City Chiefs the last couple of years, and force teams like the Chiefs and so many other teams to matriculate the ball down the field, that bend but don't break style. To basically, the offense is going to mess up before the, eventually, and so that plays to the defensive strength. And so while we can be excited about Michael Penix's potential to pump this offense up and elevate this offense with his ability to attack deep with that big, strong arm that he has, defensive coordinators get paid too. And they're going to start playing coverages that are going to potentially try to limit that arm strength and that vertical pass. And so therefore, Michael Penix is going to have to take, as they often say, what the defenses give him. And that's going to be needing to be able to carve up defenses with these short and intermediate throws. And can he be efficient in that area? And of course, the answer is yes, he can. But, the doubt is how consistent can he be with that efficiency, right? Which is the core of efficiency, consistency, right? And so if you go back and you look at Michael Penix's 3 starts last year, that ability to hit those intermediate throws was much more up and down than we would ideally want, right? It was very up against the Giants. It was very down against the Commanders. And then it was kind of a mixed bag against the Panthers. And again, this is where, when we talk about Michael Penix's deficiencies when it comes to accuracy, this is where that comes into play, where you look at some of these advanced stats from like next gen stats and whatnot, completion rate over expected, right? And just looking at those intermediate throws, those 10 to 19 yard throws, right? Penix's completion rate over expected was under what was expected. It was minus 13.6, meaning that his completion percentage was 14 points under what it, quote unquote, should have been based off of the distance he was throwing the football. And if you stacked it against all the other quarterbacks in the NFL, it would have been the worst number in the entire league on those intermediate throws. Now, to be fair to Penix, Kirk Cousins didn't shine in this area either. In last year's offense, he's completion percentage over expected was minus 4.7, which was 27th out of 35 qualifying starting quarterbacks last year. And so that might be a reflection more of the offense than particularly Penix himself. But of course, we know the offense is going to be so much better because in Zach Robinson, we trust. But, I don't think the stat is the end all be all. But as we discussed during the season, particularly in that Washington game, Penix did struggle with these things, right? We tend to focus on how well he came through in the clutch because, those are the high leverage situations, and that's where you want your quarterback to come through. But Penix did miss a lot of throws in that Washington game. And while nobody would sit here and say, hey, Washington had a rock solid defense last year, it was the best of the three defenses that he faced. And that's notable because Washington was only 23rd in DVOA last year on defense last year. And when you look ahead to the 2025 season, 12 out of their games this year will come against teams that were better defenses than Washington had last year. Now, obviously, we don't know how these defenses will perform this year, but, I think it's reasonable to assume that we will see a majority of games against much better competition than what Penix saw last year. And so basically, it's only going to get harder from here. So we'll see if Penix can make strides. I think he absolutely can, but it's still a question mark as we sit here today. But he certainly has it from the neck up in terms of the processing and the decision-making when it comes to being able to pick apart these teams and defenses on the short and intermediate throws. He's just got to make the throws, and we just need to see it. So we will see if Michael Penix can make those throws this upcoming season. But if he does, one particular player, Drake London, stands to gain a lot if he can, and we'll get into that as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. So as a small business owner, your work doesn't end when the clock hits 5. Your business is always on your mind, which means when it's time to hire, you need a partner that's going to work just as hard as you do. And that's where LinkedIn Jobs comes in. When you clock out, LinkedIn clocks in. LinkedIn's going to make it easy to post your job for free and share it with your network and get qualified candidates all in one place. And when you post your job, LinkedIn has a new feature that can help you write job descriptions and then quickly get your job in front of people with deep candidate insights. And here's a pro tip: add the hashtag hiring frame to your profile picture and double the reach to qualified candidates. No wonder 72% of small businesses say LinkedIn helps them find high quality hires. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. So last week when we talked about the deep ball, it was partially prompted by a Locked On Falcons Discord member, link in the description below if you want to join the conversation, was asking about Darnell Mooney's breakout potential this year. And obviously that was related to the deep ball because Mooney was by far the team's best deep threat on the team last year. And we didn't really see the Falcons try to push the ball down the field to anybody else at a consistent level. We saw a stretch of games where they were doing that with Kyle Pitts. We saw a stretch of games at the end of the season where they were doing that with Drake London. And hopefully we'll see, bigger stretch for all of those guys when it comes to getting those explosive plays. Again, we're going to work out those growing pains with Zach Robinson. In Zach, we trust. But, the main guy that was their sort of underneath guy was Drake London. And that worked not only when Drake London was lined up outside, but also inside. And when you look at those 3 games where Penix was the starter, and as a reminder, Darnell Mooney did not play in one of those games, the season finale against the Panthers. But when you look at that connection that Penix and London had, particularly on those underneath throws, those intermediate throws, 10 to 19 yards in the air, overwhelmingly, it was the Drake London.
Drake! Drake!
Yes, Drake. And, you look at the 34 intermediate throws that Michael Penix had in those final 3 games, Drake London was targeted on 20 of them, almost 60% of those throws. And when Penix targeted Drake on those intermediate throws, his passer rating was 89, which is not elite, but is certainly solid number, above average when it comes to passing efficiency. Even though he was only completing about 45% of those throws. Again, some of that owed to some missed throws and, some contested throws and all that stuff. But, when Penix was targeting anybody else other than Drake London on those intermediate throws, his passer rating fell from 89 to Drake London to 42 to anybody else. So basically less than half. And so obviously we need to see both of those numbers improve if this offense wants to be the more efficient offense this upcoming season. But we're assuming it's going to do, because what else are we going to do? We just got to keep pumping. But if and when defenses are forcing the Falcons offense to kind of dink and dunk their way down the field this year, it's very clearly going to be very beneficial to Drake.
Drake, yes.
So yes, continue to buy your Drake London stock this year, because I think he absolutely has the potential to have a breakout season again, because NFL teams are going to be like, we're not going to let Michael Penix be able to air it all out. Now, obviously, the Falcons will do their best to, usurp what defenses are planning to do that. But if defenses are successful in forcing the Falcons to go underneath, Drake London is going to feast. He's going to be their mainstay guy. Obviously, we want to see other guys step up in those opportunities. Drake can't do it alone. Obviously, Darnell Mooney, we hope to see him be able to use his route running and separation ability as that sort of second option. And I hope we get to see a lot more Kyle Pitts, particularly on that intermediate area of the field, because he was very effective last year on those intermediates when you look at things like EPA, when he was targeted 10 to 19 yards down the field. Now, a lot of that was owed to a lot of those explosive plays that we did see from Kyle Pitts in that middle portion of the season, came on some, throws that were like in that 15 to 19 yard range, some of those seam balls, those corner routes, all those various things. If you just look at Kyle Pitts' intermediate targets, right, the passes that went in the air 10 to 19 yards, he had about 7 catches last year, but averaged about 31 yards per catch on those 7 catches and had 4 touchdowns on those 7 catches. So very explosive in that regard. But going back and watching a little bit of the film from previous years on those intermediate targets, you saw a lot of digs and out patterns for Kyle Pitts, and he was very effective in those routes. Now, I know Zach Robinson loves to be an 11 personnel team, and that's going to be a big part of this team's ability to open up the run game. And we know, given some of the concerns we might have for the run game, including, the potential decline of the center position from going from Drew Dalman to Ryan Newsome, that we will be talking more about as the summer rolls along. Absolutely, the Falcons want to do everything in their power to open up the run game and help the run game. And so that may mean, again, a heavy focus and heavy emphasis on 11 personnel, those 3 wide receiver sets that we're talking about, especially when it comes to matriculating the ball down the field, right? Being an effective and efficient rushing team is a huge part of that, right? Because the weakness, the strength of those 2 high safety looks, those split safety looks, is that they limit the explosive plays, but they also make defenses a lot more vulnerable to a, downhill run game. So we'll see how the Falcons balance that. But on the notion of Kyle Pitts, again, I still think Kyle Pitts has a role to play in this team. And every time I watched last year where the Falcons would run a dagger concept with Ray McLeod, I died a little inside. And I just really wish Zach Robinson can, figure out the 12 personnel, or at least run some passing concepts out of 11 personnel with Kyle Pitts being a part of the offense. Some of the things that the Vikings do very effectively with TJ Hawkinson, but those will be things that we will discuss as we get further along this summer on the podcast. So we were not going to devote too much time on the rest of today's episode to talking about, how to unlock Kyle Pitts on the pod today. That is a topic for the future here on Locked On Falcons. We're going to be here all summer long, guys. While everybody else is going on vacation over the next, 6 to 8 weeks, we're going to be here every stinking day of the week. So there's lots of things to talk about. So continue to make Locked On Falcons your first listen, and continue to make Locked On Falcons your first listen today, or, keep the first listen going. Because, speaking of unlocking and summer things, let's talk about the NFL unlocking pro players being allowed to play in the 2028 Summer Olympics. And we'll do that to wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. So NFL owners unanimously passed the vote to allow NFL players to participate in the 2028 Summer Olympics that are coming up in Los Angeles, with the debut of flag football in those summer games. And on a previous Atlanta football party over Locked On Sports Atlanta, I expressed some skepticism over whether NFL owners would be enthusiastic about letting their $1 million players play in the summer games. But it appears that the NFL owners are more enthusiastic than I initially thought they would be, because I'm imagining they're probably looking at this as a situation that parallels that 92 Barcelona games, or it was Barcelona, right? 92? Yeah, because Atlanta was 96. Where the Dream Team participated in the basketball, Summer Olympics basketball, and that really did wonders to spreading the game internationally. the basketball NBA. And that's why, there's so many NBA players that all started, 30 plus years ago with that dream team game. And I imagine the NFL owners are like, hey, this could be the thing for 30 plus years. Where will we be three decades from now with, international American football and whatnot. So we'll see on that front, but obviously 2028 is a long ways to go when it comes to football timelines, because, that's 3 years from now, and it may not seem like a huge time jump, but, if you rewind the clock to 3 years in the past, go back to 2022, if you look at that 2022 Falcons roster, only 20 players that were on that 2022 team to end the season are still left over on the Falcons. And a couple of those guys like Felipe Franks and Mike Ford left and then came back to the Falcons. And so roughly about 70% of the Falcons roster is gone from that 2022 season. So we can speculate about which Falcon players we would love to see play in the Summer Olympic Games in 2028. But there's a good chance that, at least 50% of the current players that we would be talking about, there's 50% chance that player won't be a Falcon come 2028. But obviously, if we're talking about who do we want to see playing flag football in the Summer Olympics in 2028, the answer is Bijan, right? That's the obvious. You just want to see him just, doing Bijan things, incredible things, to poor, Norwegian, flag football players or whoever is in the Olympics. But, the other thing that came out of the vote is that there are going to be injury protections. That's going to be a big thing. Obviously, owners, coaches, fans do not want their players, crossing the country or so to speak, to LA and getting injured and ruining their season. The timing of the Summer Olympics is going to be fascinating as it kind of coincides with training camp. The projected start of the Summer Olympics is mid-July in 2028. It'll wrap up at the end of July, which is that time where NFL teams are all going to training camp. Now it's not going to be like half your roster is going to leave, because basically I think the NFL passed stipulations where there will only be a limit of one player per NFL team for each participating country in the Summer Olympics. And there's only going to be a handful of teams in the Summer Olympics and only going to be a handful of players on each team. So basically what that means is you don't have to worry about, in a world where both Drake and Bijan Robinson are on the Falcons come 2028, you don't have to worry about both of those guys or theoretically playing for Team USA. Let's say that, there's a possibility that, I don't know, Germany could try to recruit Drake London and, Drake London come play for the German team. But, there's only going to be about 10 players on the Team USA. And so it seems like, in theory, this is only really going to affect maybe a third of NFL teams that might lose a player to the Summer Olympics. It's going to be 5-on-5 flag football. And, it's going to be a thing where players are going to probably have to play both ways. And so, glass shatters. Is that Travis Hunter's music? Like, he's the kind of the ideal sort of person to play in the flag football come 2028. So we'll see how it affects the Falcons, but it's a cool idea, right? It'll be interesting to see if other countries are trying to recruit NFL players. I saw someone speculating about Italy, trying to get Tommy DeVito to play quarterback for them or something like that. So it'll be a fascinating development. Obviously, it's years away. God willing, I'll be still here doing the podcast. I know some of you guys are hoping that you will be able to get me out the paint by 2028, long before 2028 here on the Locked On Falcons podcast. But God willing, I'll still be able to talk about it. So we'll be like, you remember that time we talked about this a little bit in 2025? And sort of, obviously, as we get closer to it, it will be a much more poignant conversation to have. But something fun to look forward to. I was already kind of thinking about going to the 2028 Olympics, and this to me is more reason to do so, more incentive to do so. So that's going to do it for us here, guys. Another short episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast. We should be able to dive into the secondary a little bit more on tomorrow's episode. We should be joined by Locked On Irish host Tyler Wojak to discuss Xavier Watts on tomorrow's episode. Let's see what else is going on league-wide. But appreciate you guys for making Locked On Falcons your first listen. And for your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL Scouting podcast as training camps get closer and moves are still being made. Hosts Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino are going to make you the most informed NFL fan all summer and all season long. So check out Locked On NFL Scouting. It is all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.